Alright, it's a new week in Destiny, Guardian Games is here, and there's a Prophecy refresh. I'm jumping straight into Prophecy, I want to get those new weapons, and now that I've gotten a couple, how good are they? Is the Origin Trade any good? Are there any good rolls on these things? Because every single weapon got updated, and there are 3 returning weapons from Trials of the 9, and 3 weapons being removed. So, just going to take a quick look at all of the new Prophecy weapons and their new perk pools to see if they're any good, and if any are particularly worth grinding. Just for a quick refresh for those who aren't in the loop, the 3 weapons that were removed are as follows. A Swift Verdict Sidearm, the Long Walk Sniper Rifle, and the Last Breath Auto Rifle were all removed from the Prophecy loot pool. You can no longer get these anymore. The only way to get these is to get the Year 1 version out of your collections if you earned it during Year 1. And being added to the loot pool is the Prosecutor Auto Rifle, the Adjudicator Submachine Gun, and the Relentless Pulse Rifle. All of these returning from Year 1 Trials of the 9, all with different perk pools and slightly different elements. And the 3 weapons being updated are Judgement being changed from Kinetic to Stasis, the Darkest Before being changed from Arc to Solar, and a Sudden Death being changed from Arc to Void. The new encounter by loot pool looks as follows. From the first encounter, the Relentless Pulse Rifle, the Prosecutor Auto Rifle. From the second cube encounter, a Sudden Death Shotgun in the Adjudicator Submachine Gun. And from the third Kel Echo encounter is Armor. And from the Emissary chest is the Judgement Hand Cannon in the Darkest Before Pulse Rifle. Remember, don't waste your time farming the Emissary chest if you're trying to get the new Sudden Death Shotgun. It no longer drops from there. It's only going to be dropping from the second encounter, aka the cube encounter. Do with that information what you will, and make sure that you're farming the right place if you want to get the right weapons. Now, with these new weapons comes a new Origin trait, the Origin trait being Crossing Over, brand new to the Prophecy weapons, and it does as follows. This weapon has increased range and handling for the top half of the magazine, while rounds from the bottom half of the magazine deal increased damage. This Origin trait is essentially a combination of keep away and high impact reserves for the top and bottom of the magazine. It isn't affected by things like health, it's only affected by magazine size, and yes, it is influenced by magazine size changes. You can tell that the Origin perk is working one of 2 ways, either by looking at the amount of bullets that are left in your magazine, or the Origin perk is denoted by a fluxing buff on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, as you can see here. The top half of the magazine, it will say light, and for the bottom half of the magazine, it will say dark. In my opinion, this is just more visual clutter that's going to impact the quality of your play, since if you're using these weapons, it's just another extra buff to consider, and since you can only have 4 displayed at any given time, it might be blocking something a little bit more useful. Since it is a weapon Origin trait, it has increased priority over every single other buff and or debuff on your character. So this thing is not going to go away as long as you're using the Prophecy weapons. Now, moving on to the perk pools. Are these weapons any good? Are they bad? We're just going to look at these one by one, and I'm going to tell you my opinion. Since I am the weapon rules man and people totally don't get mad at what I have to say, I'm going to tell you my honest opinion based off of just looking at the perks and my minimal experience with these new weapons. So, here we go. Starting off with one of the weapons I earned is the Judgement Hand Cannon, which now deals stasis damage. The role I earned on mine has Vorpal Weapon, Enlightened Action, Extended Mag, and the Steady Hand Cannon sight. Now, the role I received of Vorpal Weapon and Enlightened Actions is not good. I'm not even going to consider using this in Crucible. When I'm looking at the perks, the role that I'm going to be going for is something as follows. Either Slide Shot Timed Payload, a Slide Shot into Opening Shot, Slide Shot into Eye of the Storm. Essentially, this is a 140 hand cannon. Slide Shot is a very, very valuable perk. This thing reminds me of another 140 hand cannon. Rose. It reminds me of Rose. There are a couple noticeable differences, that being Rose has much more handling and reload speed compared to the new Judgement, and also Rose has a much better perk pool considering you can get it with Slide Shot and Explosive Payload. It's probably the best 140 in the game right now. It's certainly the most popular by player usage statistics. The only thing that Judgement has going compared to Rose is the fact that, like with most Year 1 weapons, you can get them with different sights. I know some people are really finicky with their sights and hate the fact that Bungie stopped doing unique sights on weapons. So here's a hand cannon for you. If you want to customize your sights, you just have a slightly worse version of Rose that can't roll with explosive payload, but it can still roll with slide shot, opening shot, or Eye of the Storm, or however you want to use this thing. Me personally, I think I'm definitely going to farm for a slide shot, opening shot roll just to get something that is like Rose, but not the same. Also, this thing can roll with headstone and timed payload. I think that might be okay. Roll for PvE, even though I don't think you'd catch me dead bringing this thing into any endgame PvE activities. Demolitionist is funky. It has Adrenaline Junkie, Demo Adrenaline Junkie, like a lot of the other stasis weapons, so there is some potential there, but if you're using Demo Adrenaline Junkie, you're really not doing it on a hand cannon. Otherwise, this thing is perfectly passable. It's just that 140s aren't in the best place in the meta right now when 120s are so strong, and also it has a direct competitor in Rose, and Rose, in my opinion, is a far superior hand cannon, and I believe the majority of the player base would agree with me based on usage ratings, but we will see how Judgement shapes up in the coming weeks as we get to farm more of it. Moving on to the next weapon I managed to actually earn is the new Relentless Pulse Rifle. This thing is interesting. The roll I got on it had Headseeker and Rapid Hit. I do not think that Headseeker is a particularly good perk, but Rapid Hit is okay considering this thing's reload speed is as slow as sin. Now, this thing has a couple of interesting rolls. For starters, you can't roll any sight perks on this one, even though it is a year 1 weapon, and also it can roll things like Outlaw Desperado. Even though Desperado isn't as good as it used to be, it can get Keep Away in column 3, Frenzy column 4. It can also get Zen Moment and Moving Target in column 4. It can get Slide Shot, Snapshot, Slice, Rapid Hit, and Outlaw in column 3. I think that this thing has potential. When I say that this thing has potential, what I mean is that for its most apt comparisons, I think of 2 guns. For starters, the new Belisarius D from Crucible Competitive Rewards. I think that this thing is not only underrated, but it now has some in-slot competition despite being an aggressive 4-firing burst. The Relentless is a high impact, so the super slow firing 3-round burst, but the fact that this thing also gets Outlaw Desperado and is a high impact frame, it reminds me a lot of the old Redrix Broadsword, Redrix Claymore. This thing is my favorite pulse rifle in the entire game. I'm very upset that they removed it, even though that they nerfed Desperado. This thing is still fun to use, and Relentless reminds me a lot of Redrix Broadsword in the way that its stats are. It has a couple differences in the numbers when you look at its handling and stability and things like that, but it really is minimal. It feels a lot like using Redrix in game. It has a similar recoil cone, 65 to 75, so it's going to feel the same. I think that this thing is super interesting. I'd love to farm a couple rolls. The best roll from this, in my opinion, is going to involve Keep Away. I am not convinced that Slice, Snapshot, Slideaways, Rapid Hit, or Outlaw is going to be better than Keep Away, considering the way the game is played currently when you're using pulse rifles. And for your column 4 perks, it's probably just going to be a toss-up for me personally between Frenzy and Desperado. Essentially, getting this thing to work with Desperado is going to be a little more difficult than it used to be, and Frenzy is just a solid damage perk all around. I don't rate Zen Moment, I don't rate Moving Target, Headseeker. I just think is actively bad, and you're really not using Hatchling on this archetype of pulse rifle. Don't get me wrong, you can use Hatchling on it for those of you who Hatchling is your favorite perk, but if you're using Hatchling on a high impact frame auto rifle in anything in the game, the Hatchlings not only are not doing that much damage anymore now that the March 5th patch has nuked the effectiveness of Hatchlings in Crucible. I think you're better off trying to roll either Keep Away, Outlaw, in either Desperado, Frenzy, perk 3 and 4, but use what you want. That's just what I'm going for. Moving on to a gun that I earned, Adjudicator. I earned the role Onslaught and Subsistence on this thing. It is one of those guns that is kind of like the original Breakneck. It is a 600 RPM precision frame SMG. Now with these, its biggest competition, as most of you who've played Crucible in the last year should know, is going to be both the Shayor's Wrath and the Unending Tempest. These are both 600 RPM precision frames, so this is what we're competing with when we're thinking about the perks for Adjudicator in both PvE and PvP. For PvE purposes, as I already mentioned, the fact that this thing can get Onslaught, I like Onslaught as a perk. It can also get Frenzy, Kinetic Tremors, and Rampage. Those are going to be good perks for PvE purposes. In its perk 3 columns, it can roll Threat Detector, Subsistence, Rangefinder, Perpetual Motion, Feeding Frenzy, Dynamic Sway Reduction. This thing fires super fast when it has the Onslaught stacked at ×3, so I'm thinking that going for a Feeding Frenzy Onslaught roll could be good. So this thing can roll Subsistence, which is going to get you 17% of the magazine every time you get a kill. It doesn't deal a whole heck of a lot of damage, so it might be better just stacking the Feeding Frenzy reload and the Onslaught reload. Now, other perks on this thing too, Target Lock. Target Lock is nuked. It is nerfed. It takes longer to activate, and I'm not convinced that the damage from this is going to be competitive with other guns that just have an innate damage perk like Rampage and or Kill Clip. But, you know, this thing rolls a Feeding Frenzy, it rolls with Fragile Focus. I don't know how effective Fragile Focus is going to be. Some people like it. I'm not that big of a fan of it. Moving on, this thing should be okay. We haven't seen it in the meta for a really long time. This thing was sunset a very long time ago. You haven't been able to use it in quite a long time competitively. But this is one of those that does have a lot of good rolls. In its perk 4 or 5 of the 6 perks that it has are actually going to be good, with the exception of Fragile Focus. I'm sorry if your favorite perk is Fragile Focus. Grow up. Now, for perk 3, you're probably going to be leaning into either Rangefinder, Feeding Frenzy, or Dynamic Sway Reduction. I'd like to see how good Dynamic Sway Reduction is on this thing before making any final determinations. It can roll all the bores you'd expect, all the magazine perks that you'd expect on an SMG, and it is pretty easy to farm Prophecy. So I'm going to try to get a good one of these. Might make a video on it later. This thing, I feel, does have potential. Moving on to the final added weapon, it is the Prosecutor Legendary Arc Auto Rifle. This thing is a precision frame, 450 RPM, which means that its competition is the Amit AR2. We all know how good the Amit is. It is just the most solid role-playing auto rifle in the game right now. If you're in Crucible, there's a little bit better auto rifles in PvE, but if you're taking this thing into Crucible, Amit is one of your better choices for auto rifles, so that's what it's competing with. I didn't actually earn one of these, so we're doing everything in theory here based on my knowledge of the video game. So looking at its actual perk pools, it does have a couple interesting things. It has Keep Away in column 3. Keep Away is a solid perk, especially on an auto rifle. It has Volt Shot, Target Lock, Golden Tricorn, and Frenzy in column 4. I'm staying away from Tap the Trigger and Cascade Point personally, so 4 out of 6 good perks in column 4. In column 3, besides Keep Away, we're dealing with Dragonfly, Zen Moment, and maybe Rewind Rounds. Dragonfly is more useful in PvE than it is in PvP. Very few circumstances that you're going to see Dragonfly be useful. So my initial impression of this gun is one thing. For starters, in Crucible, going for a role that has Keep Away and either Frenzy or Golden Tricorn just for a little bit of extra damage. I think Golden Tricorn is a much more consistent damage perk as long as you're able to just hit somebody in the face with an arc ability. Arc abilities are good on most of the subclasses for getting one-shot kills, with the exception of maybe Hunter. They don't have reliable one-hit potential with their arc abilities. Volt Shot is just a good perk. Target Lock is a little bit worse, but it's easy to use on an auto rifle, so I can see it's still being useful. So this thing is okay. Despite being a year 1 weapon, you can't change the sights. They went towards the direction of giving it barrel perks, which I think is going to better suit this thing long term. And besides that, I'm not particularly excited for this one. There's nothing screaming at me that this is going to be a good end game or top tier weapon, but we'll see as the time goes. I think my preferred role for Crucible is going to be Keep Away Frenzy, and my role for everything else is more likely going to be Dragonfly Volt Shot. I think that those are going to be okay roles, and then, you know, columns 1 and 2, we don't get upset most of the time. So that's the Prosecutor Assault Rifle. It's back after all this time, so we'll see how it does. Moving on to a sudden death shotgun. This is one of the weapons that had its element changed and its perk pool changed. This time it is getting switched from arc to void. It is now a void weapon, and the perk pool is a little bit different. It is an aggressive frame shotgun, so this has a lot of competition, limited to but not including Astral Horizon, Imperial Decree, the Ragnil D, Found Verdict, Mindbender's Ambition, the Comedian, and the Last Man Standing. So think of it, it has a lot of competition when we're considering if this thing is going to be good, especially in slot competition. So looking at its perks just right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind to me is the combination of Slide Shot, Opening Shot. On the Void version of a Sudden Death, it is able to roll with Slide Shot, Opening Shot. It was never able to roll with Slide Shot, Opening Shot on the Arc version. As you can see, this is the old version from Season 15, no Slide Shot, Opening Shot. Slide Shot, Opening Shot is one of the best ape rolls in the entire game. When I say ape, I mean Titan ape. Come on. So that is going to be a good Crucible roll, and besides that, in column 4, this thing rolls with Trench Barrel and 1-2 Punch. If any of you know anything about endgame PvE, soloing, or just high damage possibilities, you would know that Trench Barrel and 1-2 Punch are some of the best perks to have in the entire game when you're going with that. Besides those perks, I mean, Slide Shot, Opening Shot is such a perfect roll on the shotgun. I'm hesitant to say anything else. Barrel Constrictor is one of those new perks that you don't see on a whole heck of a lot of things, so Barrel Constrictor Slide Shot could be useful, considering that Barrel Constrictor does last for nearly 8 seconds. It also rolls Elemental Capacitor in column 3, whereas before it rolled Elemental Capacitor in column 4, so you're no longer to get the Slide Shot Elemental Capacitor, which you used to be able to get on the Arc version of this weapon, so you can't get that anymore, just so you know. And besides that, Repulsor Brace, destabilizing rounds if you want to mess around with void modifiers. I think this thing will be perfectly serviceable. I do not believe it's going to be better than something like Found Verdict for in-slot competition. It's definitely going to be better than its old Arc version of a Sudden Death, considering the fact that the Origin trait, the top half of the magazine, you're getting increased range and handling, and for the bottom half, you're getting increased damage. So this thing in Crucible is going to be loading in with 2 rounds, usually off of spawn, and if you look at the magazine, size 4, you're always going to be spawning with that extra damage, which inherently is going to give it extra range. More damage means you can kill from slightly further. So this thing is going to be really, really good. I think this is the best, if not the second best new weapon from this dungeon. We'll have to do some testing in the coming weeks, so we'll see about that, but I think that this thing is going to be phenomenal. Last but not least is the Darkest Before, which is being changed from Arc to Solar. On the new Solar version of Darkest Before, I feel that every issue with the Arc version is fixed. That being said, the issue that needed to be fixed was giving it a consistent damage perk, and it gets that in Kill Clip. It gets Kill Clip as a consistent damage perk. It gets One for All if you want something a little bit more finicky, and it also is able to roll with Incandescent, Focused Fury. Besides that, Headseeker and Surplus aren't useful, so 4 out of 6 in column 4, and for column 3, you're able to get Elemental Capacitor, Heal Clip, and Wellspring. Heal Clip is good now because as of the March 5th balance patch, it grants Cure ×2 to you and Cure ×1 to your allies, which basically means you're getting a full heal plus restoration every single time you get a kill with this. I feel that this thing is going to be crazy if you can figure out how to get some more reload on this. Being able to combo Heal Clip and Kill Clip is going to be one of the better options in my opinion. This is a rapid fire pulse rifle, so its main competition is the Peace of Mind, Scalar Potential, and Horror's Release. These 3 are currently the best rapid fire pulse rifles in the game. Scalar Potential is certainly the most popular because it's craftable and able to get some of those good things. Besides that, Scalar Potential at least doesn't have a good perk for damage perk, so I think that Darkest Before is going to edge it out slightly in my opinion. I know they're different elements, but we do with that what we will. Same thing with Horror's Release. This thing is really, really good at Horror's Release. It's my favorite rapid fire in the game currently. I'm going to need to use Darkest Before, the new version of it, to get a feel of it. Comparing it to the original Darkest Before, you can't get Slide Shot Elemental Capacitor anymore. Slide Shot was removed and Elemental Capacitor was moved to perk column 3, which means you are able to get it with Elemental Capacitor and a good damage perk for once, rather than having to sacrifice a damage perk like Rampage just to get Elemental Capacitor on the original Arc version of it. Besides that, you lost Quick Draw. Quick Draw was good. Also, you lost Overflow. I don't really use Overflow. I don't think anybody ever used Overflow on this thing. I think that Darkest Before is really, really good as a arc version of it. I used it quite a lot. It was one of my go-to pulse rifles before the pulse rifle changes in Season 16, but I used it during Season 15, Season 16, and now in Season 23, having the new Darkest Before. I think this thing is going to be very good. Like I already mentioned, the role that I'm going to be going for is Heal Clip, Kill Clip. Because of the new changes to Heal Clip, I think this thing is going to be crazy for hitting some absolutely wild clips and being able to just momentum your way through most people with high cal rounds. And Kill Clip, it also rolls with Incandescent. I don't think you should be using Incandescent on this thing. I feel like Kill Clip is the only perk in column 4 that you should be going for. Maybe One for All, but Kill Clip is just way, way more consistent than One for All ever could hope to be. So that's where we're at with the weapons from the new changes to Prophecy Dungeon. Besides that, the Prophecy Dungeon is identical. There was no changes to the difficulty, there was no changes to the mechanics, there was no changes to enemy placement. It is just the same exact dungeon except with an updated loot pool. I like these changes. I think this is a good refresh, and I think that this should be done more often for the older dungeons. Apart from that, I'm just going to leave you with this singular clip. The Guardian Games introduced a new class of transportation to the game. Instead of using a Sparrow, you can now use a hoverboard, and the hoverboard has some cool little tricks you can do, and one of those tricks is being able to skip the entire gap of the Sparrow race section of Prophecy. So instead of struggling with using a Sparrow, you can just use the hoverboard and grind your way over nothing and skip the entire encounter. So yeah, I'm just going to play this clip out and going to end the video once it's done. So thank you all very much for watching. Have a great day and see you next time.